Hi, welcome to the setup video for the LMI G-WHIZ. To begin, press and hold the center button for about 4 seconds until the light stops to flash. Once the light stops flashing, press the down arrow. It will pull up this menu. Use your down arrow and select setup mode. Put your gauge in setup mode. The green light will begin to flash. Now, with wireless utility open, press and release the button to send the information to wireless utility. You'll get a message that pops up saying that the gauge is not associated. Click on OK, and click on the green plus at the top of the screen. You'll get another message that says the gauge is now associated. Click on OK again, and press and release the button again to send the reading to wireless utility. The gauge will populate in the first row of these columns here. Double click on the number 1 to open up the gauge. It will take about 30 seconds to process. Click on OK. Once the model has been loaded, you can start editing the models inside of the gauge. Starting with description, this can have a 4-character max for door front, door rear, or left door front, left door rear, and so on. Models, this is completely user defined. You have 8 characters max. By default, it will be MD1 through MD10. As you can see here, we have one custom one in an MD9 slider. Moving on from models, we have the active boxes. This will determine which of the 5 measurements are active inside of this model. As you can see, number 1 has 4 active measurements for 4 doors. Front, driver rear, front, passenger rear, left, right, and so on. You can also see that you have 2 different types of velocity measurements. You have V peak and V closing. V peak will read out the highest velocity measured during the test. V closing will put out the velocity measured at a distance set away from closing. You also have different speeds: 400, 200, 100, 800, and 1600. This is an inverse relationship, so the lower the number is, the more time you have. The higher the number is, the less time you have. Slider. This is determined if it's a sliding door, such as on a minivan. Lower specs generally set to 0. Upper specs, these are completely user defined, and it can be any number that the user wishes to use. Mass, this is the mass of the door in kilograms. Coefficient of mass, this is also user defined as well as mass, and can be put in here. Velocity at distance, this is used for velocity at closing. This is the measurement of how far away from the door in inches the velocity will read. Time constant, this is also user defined. Now, above models, you will see that you have gauge configurations. Gauge model, gauge label, and gauge ID cannot be changed. They are set inside of the gauge and they are set in stone. Timeout controls how long the gauge will stay in setup mode before timing out and going back into its regular state. Force, you have the options of newtons or foot-pounds to measure in. Velocity is feet per second or meters per second. Parameters control which reads out. Parameters also work as the send and display. Now, send and display. You can only have 2 selected at one time. If there are more than 2, wireless utility will notify you that more than 2 selections have been made, and to correct this error. Once you've set up your gauge configurations to the way that you would like it, click on Update. Once you have set up models the way you would like it, click on Update Models. Now, before we click on Update Models, we have options here as Load Defaults and Download Curve. Load Defaults will set up the default models set by LMI inside of the gauge. To accomplish this, simply click on Load Defaults and then click Update Models once the defaults have loaded. Download Curve. If you click here, you will be brought to a window. At this point, you can take your gauge out of setup mode, take a reading, put the gauge back in setup mode, and then press Download. The reading that you will just take will show up in a graph in this blank area, and the data will be shown here. Once you are done with the chart, click on the X and it will take you back to the model screen. Once your gauges have been updated and you have clicked on Update Models, like so, Wireless Utility will go through its process of sending the new models to the gauge. This can take time, so be patient with the software. Once the models have loaded into the gauge, you'll get a notification saying Program Update Complete. Please exit screen to commit changes. Come up and click on the X. The gauge will be taken out of setup mode and you will be ready to use your gauge.